The film commences with the portrayal of David Kopesh, a man of advanced years, yet brimming with vitality. He is a cultural critic and an academic, leading a life that is centered around the celebration of his personal freedom. Despite his advancing years, he remains active in his profession, frequently participating in interviews to discuss his research and delivering lectures. David has a history of marriage and is a father to a son who harbors a profound sense of resentment towards him, stemming from David's decision to leave his mother. His relationships with women are characterized by their casual nature, brevity, and a focus that is predominantly on physical intimacy. David's friend George O'Hearn offers him advice on how to structure his life. He suggests that David should compartmentalize his life, engaging in intellectual discourse and appreciating art with a wife, while maintaining sexual relationships that are purely for the pursuit of pleasure. David, who sees himself as an independent and fulfilled person, comes across one of his students named Consuela Castillo. Consuela is not only beautiful but also confident, and she captures David's attention in a way that no other woman has before. Because of this, David decides to wait until he has submitted all of his students' grades before making a move. Finally, at the graduation party, he gets the chance to meet Consuela. During the event, Consuela shows special interest in David, and he feels tempted to pursue a deep and intimate connection with her on the very same day. As they engage in a conversation about literature and poetry, Consuela flirts with David, and he is pleasantly surprised to discover that they share the same interests. This leaves him feeling satisfied and content. The next morning, David meets up with his colleague and friend George to play a game of tennis. David mentions Consuela to George, describing her as seductive and naturally authoritative, and he confesses that his desire for her is growing. In response, George advises David to give in to his desires and have a sexual encounter with Consuela. They also discuss George's own infidelity, as he has been cheating on his wife with a younger woman. Later that night, we catch a glimpse of David engaging in a casual, yet passionate sexual relationship with Caroline, another former student of his. They fulfill each other's sexual needs without any serious commitment. It is worth noting that Caroline was also a former student of David's, and they continued their usual casual encounters that night. Meanwhile, David's son calls and leaves a message expressing his desire to talk to his father. However, David is hesitant and unwilling to communicate with his son. He dismisses the message and chooses not to engage in the conversation. The next evening, David invites Consuela to join him for a movie outing. They both enjoy the theater experience, and after leaving the cinema, David suggests that instead of going to other potentially mundane places, they should go to his home. Consuela agrees, and they head to David's house. Once they arrive, David sets a romantic atmosphere by playing the piano for Consuela, showcasing his impressive skills. Consuela is impressed and expresses her appreciation. They share a glass of wine before David takes Consuela to a room in the house where he used to develop pictures in the dark as a hobby. He explains that with the digital age, he rarely engages in this hobby anymore. As they spend more time together, David takes the initiative to kiss Consuela, and she responds in kind. The night becomes passionate as they make love. The following morning, David meets up with his friend George at a pastry shop to discuss the events of the previous night. David also expresses his fear of getting older and not being able to attract someone like Consuela, who seems to prefer younger and more physically fit men. In response, George advises David to change his perspective and see himself as growing up rather than growing old. The scene then shifts to subsequent days, where David and Consuela continue to meet and deepen their intimacy. Consuela has let her guard down and fully accepts David as her lover. On David's side, he has concerns about the future of their relationship, but finds himself unable to stop seeing Consuela. In the following days, David becomes increasingly insecure and suspicious of Consuela. One night, he waits for Consuela in the city and imagines seeing her kissing another man. However, it turns out to be a hallucination, and Consuela eventually appears and kisses him. The following day, David confides in his friend George, pouring out his feelings of insecurity and obsession regarding the possibility of Consuela being unfaithful. Seeking advice, George suggests that David should end the relationship and go back to living his life as he did before. However, David deeply cares for Consuela and instead decides to plan a romantic getaway to Venice for the two of them. Consuela happily agrees to the trip, and as they embrace, they share a passionate kiss that symbolizes the deepening of their connection. During their conversation, conversation, Consuela casually mentions an upcoming party where she and her brother will be dancing, drinking, and having fun. This innocent remark triggers suspicion in David, who becomes uneasy about the man Consuela refers to as her brother. This tension starts to strain him. David goes home but can't help imagining Consuela having an affair with a younger and more attractive man. He even follows her to a birthday party that night, and she catches him spying on her. When she confronts him, he explains himself as if he came across the bar while walking down the streets, but she knows he is spying on her, so she is offended by his distrust, so she tells him to wait for her call. He leaves the place ashamed, and at home, Consuela calls him and reserves a dinner for the two of them the next night. She says they will talk there and hang up. At the restaurant, Consuela looks stunning, and during their meal, they engage in a heartfelt conversation. She asks David what she truly means to him, expressing her thoughts about their potential future and his attempts to control her when she spends time with friends and family. David, acknowledging his fear of their significant age difference, admits his insecurities. In response, Consuela embraces him, assuring him of her love, and they reconcile their differences. Returning home that night, they share an intimate moment as David plays the piano for Consuela, deepening their bond even further. The days that followed were calm and uneventful. David began discussing Consuela during his interviews. However, one morning while David was showering, Caroline unexpectedly rang the doorbell. He was surprised to see her after such a long time. Since Consuela wasn't home, he allowed Caroline into his bed, and they ended up having an affair, betraying Consuela's trust. Despite the casual nature of their relationship, Caroline developed feelings for David, and he became comfortable sleeping with both women. However, their secret arrangement took a turn when Caroline discovered one of Consuela's tampons in David's bathroom. David lied, claiming it belonged to one of George's girlfriends who had a sleepover at his house. Although Caroline confronted him to tell the truth, he denied it and convinced her that she was the only woman in his life. For the next few days, nothing significant occurred. David spent time with Consuela at the beach and at home. They took pictures together, which they later developed in a dark room. One evening, during dinner, Consuela invited David to her graduation party and pleaded with him to meet her parents. Reluctantly, he agreed to attend. However, on the day of the event, David called Consuela and falsely claimed to be stuck in heavy traffic. In reality, he was sitting in his car feeling anxious about meeting Consuela's family. Heartbroken and frustrated, Consuela called him back and tearfully accepted the end of their relationship. Later that night, David's son Kenny arrived and revealed that he too was cheating on his wife. Kenny was torn because he didn't want to break up his family like David did, but David showed little sympathy. Disgusted, Kenny left. David fell into a deep depression, and George tried to help him through it. Eventually, George confessed that he had actually grown closer to his wife despite his past infidelity. Shortly after, George asked David to host his book publication event. David hesitated, but was convinced by George to attend. However, during the event, George collapsed and needed urgent medical attention at home. When David visited him, George suddenly died after embracing both his wife and David. David now found himself incredibly lonely, with no one to talk to, and he spent most of his time drinking. One night, Caroline called David and invited him to dinner. They enjoyed their meal, but David's energy was noticeably low compared to before. They returned to David's place, and he finally confessed to having had an affair with Consuela. They shared a quiet moment together, wondering if they were finally communicating after 20 years of love. Caroline expressed her fear of growing old, and they embraced each other in genuine friendship, bringing Caroline some comfort. In another scene, David narrated that 2 years had passed without Consuela contacting him, and he struggled to overcome George's death. He admitted to ongoing pain and loneliness, feeling depressed. He went to the tennis court where he used to play with George, feeling his absence, and sadly left the place. The scene then shifted to New Year's Eve, and David received a voicemail from Consuela. Consuela mentioned that she wanted to tell him something before he heard it from anyone else. David worried that she had found another man or would ask for his blessing. When he called her, he realized she was just outside his building. Eager to meet, Consuela revealed that she had breast cancer and needed surgery. Devastated, David cried and questioned why she hadn't told him sooner. Consuela explained that he loved her body like no one else, and asked him to take topless photos of her before the surgery altered her breasts. David agreed and prepared to take the photos, overcome with grief. Consuela then takes off her top to have her pictures taken one last time. Afterward, David and Consuela decide to share a bottle of wine. Consuela, overwhelmed by the sadness of death, drinks excessively and becomes intoxicated. David sympathizes with her and feels remorseful, and they embrace each other genuinely, aware that it may be their final embrace. The following day, David makes his way to meet Kenny, a healthcare professional at the medical facility where Consuela is scheduled to undergo a surgical procedure. He asks Kenny to investigate Consuela's medical condition. Kenny implies that her health situation is quite severe or serious. David accepts the reality of the situation and bids farewell to his son before leaving the office. Before he leaves, David inquires about Kenny's wife, and Kenny informs him that she has now forgiven him and they are living well. After some time has passed, the inevitable day arrives, and we witness David visiting Consuela, who is in the process of recovering from her surgery. As they interact, Consuela expresses her deep longing, conveying, "I will miss you." In response, David offers her reassurance by being present and saying, "I am here." He then joins her on the hospital bed, tenderly kissing her face to provide comfort and show his affection. In a reflective moment, our attention is drawn back to a previous scene where the couple is leisurely walking along the beach. It was during this intimate stroll that Consuela courageously confessed her love for David. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.